Welcome to another episode of the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast about the environment in Canada by Sierra Club Canada. I'm Conor Curtis, Head of Communications with Sierra Club Canada, and today I'm going to be talking with Tamsyn Neale about Sierra Club Canada's Wild Child PEI program. Wild Child is a series of programs that we have in Edmonton, Nova Scotia, and PEI that help get kids out into nature for tens of thousands of hours every year. But as we'll hear from Tamsyn, it's about far more than just having them experience the natural world. It's about forging a deeper connection with that natural world. It's about forging a connection with specific aspects of that world, like trees. It's about learning to be responsible in nature, but also how to enjoy nature, how to appreciate Indigenous perspectives on the environment in which we live, and how to look at the environment in a positive way. On occasion, as we'll hear, it's also an experience that brings children directly into contact with the impacts of factors like climate change and biodiversity loss, things that we as adults are very much concerned about and dealing with, and if you're listening to this podcast, probably think about quite a bit. There's something to be said that we can't hope to save future generations without also giving them the connection to nature that has forged so many of our interests in these issues. That's, of course, part of Sierra Club Canada's work, and before we begin, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other action items and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. We also have a special page dedicated just to Wild Child programs. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. ET. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe so you get the latest episodes from us. Tamsyn, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for those who are listening in, can you tell us a little about who you are and how you came to work with Wild Child?
Yes, sure. So my name is Tamsyn Neale, and I have been working for PEI Wild Child for coming up on 3 years now. I actually was born and raised in Ontario and came to PEI for a very different job, a very just a temporary thing near the beginning of summer in 2021. And through some mutual friends, happened to be in touch with Hannah Garrels, who was then and is currently the director of PEI Wild Child. And I was offered a summer job for the day camps, and it just sounded like an absolutely dreamy way to spend the summer. So I said emphatically yes, and well, here I am almost 3 years later, continuing with PEI, Wild Child, and Sierra Club, and just loving every moment of it.
That's awesome. So not something you ever really intended to get involved with. Had you worked before in anything like Wild Child or done that sort of work?
Well, it was definitely not what I was expecting. It was a very happy accident, but I did have experience previously in other roles, day camps and different kids programs, including some volunteer work at, for example, Evergreen Brickworks in Ontario, as well as the Pine Project. So I had kind of dipped my toes in this work before and really enjoyed it. And so when the opportunity came up, it sounded like such a dream to get to be part of. And I had been looking at among a variety of things. This is not really related to what I studied, but I had been looking into things like the 4-school practitioner course that Child and Nature Alliance of Canada offers for like a few years earlier. And like during this opportunity to be working with PEI Wild Child, I now have been able to do that course, and yeah, I'm just really grateful it all came together. It's been truly a joy to get to be part of this work.
And what does Wild Child PEI do? So I know the answer to this, of course, and you know the answer to this, but I guess I'm curious, what is it that the program actually consists of?
Yeah, for sure. So PEI Wild Child is an almost entirely outdoor nature program for children and youth. So during the school year, we offer after school programs, a homeschool group, and some different special programs and youth programming. And then in the summer, we have day camps all throughout each week of the summer. And so these are programs where we are outside in nature, often in public parks, rain or shine or snow, and we're out there with the kids, and it's based on forest school principles. So the programming is very open-ended, child-led, inquiry-based learning, and a lot of hands-on experiences. And we're there to really support and just invite the kids into things and try to support whatever their interests are within their time with us. And so the intention is that kids have the chance to build meaningful connections with the natural world around them and their local ecosystems. And we also really work to provide as much access as we can. So we're really grateful to a number of funders that we have that allow us to offer a lot of the spots in the programs for free as community spots or pay what you can. And we work with either our own staff or separate folks who are one-on-ones to try and support kids with all a variety of accessibility needs to be able to safely thrive outside in the programs as well. We also partner with Peers Alliance, which is one of Prince Edward Island's main LGBTQ organizations. And so we work with them to deliver supportive programming for children and youth who are LGBTQ or gender diverse, and be able to have a space where they can feel safe and have allied adults in their lives and meet other children who feel the same as them, and just be able to build confidence and know that they're not alone. And so there's a range of different stuff we do, but it's all with the intention that everybody belongs outside in nature and everybody deserves to be there. And we try our best to invite that access and invite kids in to not just have nature be an abstract concept, but a place that they know and love and can build meaningful relationships with.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, it's a lot of logistical things. I'm curious, like, what's the most difficult thing you deal with during a day, on average, or does it just change every day? Like, and there's different things you might have to be doing.
Oh my goodness. Yes, every day is very different. And I think that's one of the things I and many of my colleagues really enjoy about it. A big challenge in the variability can often just frankly be the weather. I mean, we are outside unless it's unsafe to do so. So, I mean, you really got to be ready to face a whole bunch of different weather conditions and support the kids with a smiley face through that, which is very fun, but obviously sometimes can be a little tougher. And I mean, a big challenge we had was Hurricane Fiona, and actually a lot of the parks and the places we spend a lot of time in got quite decimated through that storm. And so that was a lot of adapting, but also a lot of like a mourning process, really, because you see just how these places got so damaged, and it's a loss that you have to process for yourself and with your team, but also with the kids as well.
Well, I was going to say that's got to be difficult because, I mean, you were mentioning just before about that practicality of a kid entering a natural world. Because when I think back on my
Hmm.
own childhood, for instance, right, like first times being out in nature and like early memories of nature and being in a forest or something like that, right? Like it's definitely a very different thing to if I'd just been learning about things in a textbook, right? Because like I remember in school courses, reading about different environments. There was no environmental course or anything, but you'd read about it for other things that you were learning about. Probably least so of any subject, actually, when I think about school curriculum now, looking back.
Mm,
And granted, I'm of a generation where hopefully that's changed now, but still,
hmm,
yeah,
hmm.
I'm like trying to think of like references in books even that was specifically about the environment is not very common. Like there's that practical thing when you're in there. That's got to be really devastating for a kid if they, have these natural spaces then they know, and then you get a storm like Hurricane Fiona coming along.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of the value of this type of programming is that it really does it takes a lot of the environmental issues we're facing, or just the environment in general, from being an abstract concept to a place where you have memories and beings that you were forming connections with and actually know and love. And I mean, one of the most striking memories for me after the hurricane too was there's a particular tree at a particular park that we work at that the children have called Mr. Lumpy and have a great amount of affection for. And when we were finally allowed back into that particular forest, there was quite a few of them who really specifically their main goal was they needed to go and see if Mr. Lumpy was okay. And thankfully this tree made it through the storm, but there was just they wanted to go and hug it and were actually saying out loud like, "Oh, Mr. Lumpy, I'm so glad you made it." And like that just is a memory that really just has stuck very strongly for me.
I mean, that's very specific. It's funny, like as environmentalists, we get called tree huggers a lot, but in a sort of a way that's meant to be demeaning, but it puts a different perspective on it when you see the connection that a child might have with a natural object like a tree and what that psychologically means for them.
Yes. And I mean that concept, that term comes from, as we know, very powerful roots in protest, but also trees are just so huggable. And I just love when you see kids able to engage and find that as a grounding thing or a way to, I guess, be, yeah, showing that love and affection even for more than human beings around us.
It ties in a bit, actually. It's funny because we're doing a lot of work and we'll be doing some episodes in this podcast series too, around the concept of the rights of nature, where, this sort of idea that
Mm.
natural spaces have inherent rights that can and should be respected. And I'm curious, like, does it, because I think, my generation particularly, I had to learn to become an environmentalist, right? Like there was
Mm.
nothing really specific that told me in school anyway. I mean, I was exposed to environmentalism probably younger than a lot of people were and where I grew up, but I there was nothing in school that specifically told me, oh, this is the natural world. This is how, and these things, these places, and these objects, and these natural locations have an importance of their own. Do you see a change in the kids that you interact with, before and kind of after the programs?
Yeah, I believe we do. And I think that the biggest marker of that change is that piece of whether or not the relationship building happened. Because it really does, as we were saying before, kind of take what can otherwise feel like a intangible abstract concept or just something that's happening out there and then make it very concrete right where you are right here right now with what's right in front of you. So even something I think maybe an example would be kind of how we navigate litter uh, with the kids. And so there sometimes will be kids who will come into the program and their default might be to toss their wrapper on the ground after they've eaten a snack or something like that. And I often don't see just the idea of, you have to pick this up and put it in the garbage because that's better for the environment or better for everyone. Even though that's true, sometimes that doesn't click so effectively as the relationship component, where, for example, in our programs, we have a squirrel that we call Sammy the squirrel. And whenever we're at a park, a lot of Sammy the squirrel leaves the children a book, and some of these kids get very attached to Sammy, want to leave him notes or try and make him a house or talk about him and ask us questions about him. And so sometimes just when the concept of we don't want to leave litter out in the environment isn't effective, we'll see it click a lot more effective, a lot more poignantly when we are on the approach of this is Sammy's home. We don't want to leave garbage in Sammy's home, do we? And then I've had a kid actually shift from now wanting to walk around and pick up not only their own garbage, but like any garbage they see because they want to clean up Sammy's house or Sammy's home. So I think really a lot of the things we see is that kind of connection where now it's something that and you love. And so
Mm.
now there's more of a desire to want to protect it and take care of it. And that
That's
is something that really happens when you have that repeated engagement, meaningful connection through time with those local ecosystems nearby.
It's really interesting. I've been having conversations recently with people around effective climate communication for adults, right?
Mm.
And the funny part is it's exactly the same. And maybe we don't change much as we grow older, but if you connect it to real things and give it a voice and make it personal, right? Like people are much more receptive to the idea. If you just say so many parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, right? Nobody has a real concept of what that means. But if you
Hmm.
start to talk about like the impacts, like Hurricane Fiona, right? Like, and you show people what the actual results of this are, it seems to change their minds much more effectively.
For sure. And I mean, there are huge things that are larger than any of us that we do need to rally together and have that collective action on whether it's regional, national, or global scale. But then there really is something about the fact that there also is these tangible opportunities,
Mm,
that are right here, right now, that sometimes can get lost in the story and lost in the rhetoric when
mm,
we are human beings and we are living on this earth, and there is nature right outside your front door. There are plants that birds are using. There's all of this is so real, and there are things we can do right where we are. And I feel like kids, maybe everybody, but I am seeing it with the kids, are hungry for those tangible opportunities. Like we've had the PEI Invasive Species Council come to our program a few times, and when they start talking to the kids about a specific invasive species that's there, and then the kids get the opportunity to help be pulling it out at their home base, they end up putting a lot of energy into it. And I'm used to thinking they're going to get bored of something quickly, but sometimes
mm.
they stay doing it for so long.
I was so curious on that note because we talked kind of around those big issues and sort of how to get
Mm,
dealt with in a I won't say practical but more direct way in terms of like impacts and visible impacts on the environment, the kids interacting. Do like
mm.
terms like climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, do those come up much in your work, and do you maybe end up talking about them with parents as a result of any of this?
That's a great question. I would say that sometimes it does come up, especially if we are facing something right there. Like if the kids are seeing, let's say, a bit of oil in a puddle, then they actually will sometimes start telling me something they learned at school. They will start telling us a fact or a statement that they learned that was related to climate change or something like that. But I think maybe less so in with less so in that terminology compared to maybe them really focusing on things that are examples of those
Mhm,
concepts.
mhm.
Like again, the litter is a big one that a lot of the kids really get focused on, and I mean that's just because that's so tangible and right there. And a lot of the kids, I mean, I know myself as well, just love animals and learning about animals. And so you also get to see there's a lot of care for animals and concern for their well being. And there's maybe less direct opportunities for them to support in that way. But I think that we're really interested in seeing what that could look like in terms of inviting them to have more avenues for tangible action. And so one of the things PEI Wild Child has been doing is trying to build connections with more of the environmental groups, for example, watersheds on the island, because whenever kids have a chance to have a direct, tangible, positive impact on this ecosystem they love, they get really energized into that opportunity. Whenever we've had tree planting experiences with some of those groups, or like I said, the invasive species removal, any form of native planting, creating native seed bombs, stuff like that, they get really excited about it, and often that ends up being one of the highlights that they mention at the end of the season's programming. So those kinds of opportunities, I think kids and adults alike would just are hungry for more of that opportunity, because so often the the way that climate issues are framed or environmental issues are framed are so often don't do this, don't use this, don't go there, and we're sometimes missing the the active part of like what you can do that actually could be positive.
To get
Um,
out, go somewhere, see something.
yeah, you can plant this, engage in this way, instead of just maybe feeling like your hands are kind of tied and anything you do can only be negative. There are actually also positive opportunities. And I mean, that also brings in the idea of integrating in and centering indigenous perspectives into our environmental engagement as well, because
Mm.
I think that a lot of I can't say this entirely, but I think that often there's a trend in Western conservation movements that is this very like humans and nature separate, and the way that we take care of this is by all the things we don't do to it. But in a lot of indigenous perspectives on Turtle Island, instead you situate us as human beings within the grand scheme of this network, this family tree of all relations, all of these different beings all together, and we are one of many who are here, and we can have negative impacts through our actions, but you also can engage positively in these local ecosystems and with these beings. And invitations to do so are really, really important. It could be even just things like being able to plant some native species in your backyard that migratory birds like, and then you're able to feed them as they go en route. Like there's so many little things that actually can make a big difference. Especially if we're all able to do our little piece where right where we're at.
And that's interesting because there is that history, especially with the conservation movement, has a difficult history with that. Because despite some of the benefits of that movement, there were a lot of things that happened, particularly to indigenous groups, where there was this
Mm,
perception of the environment on the part of the conservation community movement of, oh, it's this empty wilderness with nobody in it. And then often kicking people off their land to create parks off of on often indigenous people off of their land in order to conserve these areas. There's a very troubling history there, as opposed to, as
yeah,
you say, like, and again, most of the interactions I've had with people from indigenous communities is that's not the way that's for one thing not true historically. People lived in those areas for
yeah.
thousands of years. It has nothing to do with these quote unquote pristine places that have nobody in them. That one thing myth. And then the other part of that is, that's just not the way that they ever saw the natural environment. And actually this divide between us and the natural environment was one thing that repeatedly, I've sort of had to confront as really a Western creation, right? Within the last really, and even then, even within the last few hundred years, and before that, even in Western society, not necessarily the case that we thought about the environment that way.
And we would all be in a better position, I'm sure, us and the rest of the natural world, to lean into that and listen and work to bringing our minds to those perspectives and then letting that inform our actions going forward, for sure.
I wanted to ask you about two specific aspects of your work that you brought up.
Yeah.
One is you mentioned seed bombs, and thinking about our prairie chapter that's been running this wildflower garden in Winnipeg now for a couple of years, and you're talking about like local plants. How does that work? What's sort of the idea behind that?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot of land that humans live on that is very intensely developed and very separate from the biodiversity that we were kind of talking about. Like we have built our environments to be very separate from nature, even though that's not really true. And a lot of these beings are still trying to eke out a living in and amongst what we've done here. Even something as little as native seed bombs is helpful to just create another piece of the patchwork of biodiversity back into these places that humans have claimed for themselves. So the seed bomb specifically was something we did at our summer young ecologists camp that was for girls and gender minority youth in a provincial park on the island. And the PEI Invasive Species Council came through and was teaching about invasive species, and then invited all of the participants to make those native seed bombs so they could bring it back to their own home or wherever they wanted to bring this and help support the network of the ecosystem, the pollinators, the native birds that come through. Native seed bombs are just a very cool little tangible thing that we could do where you are able to kind of plant this little ball of native seeds maybe in your backyard or somewhere of your choosing and just bring a little patch of native biodiversity back to that landscape. I mean, we we live in these very very engineered and manicured environments, and it does kind of sometimes help with that fallacy that we are disconnected from nature, because there's still nature all around us. It's trying to eke out a living in and amongst human development. And so it was a way to have the youth be able to, in their own home, literally, potentially, in their own backyard, do something positive that would be able to benefit the local pollinators, migratory bird species, and create this little boost of biodiversity to help just with this whole network of beings in this ecosystem right here where they live.
That's really cool. I mean, that's something, it's an interesting tie between, because we have the Prairie chapter, of course, that operates in a very different environment. And they've had Native Flower Garden running for 2 years now in Winnipeg. That's doing a very similar thing.
Amazing.
And it's interesting to see that sort of come up in two different parts of the organization. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and this is again something, the other day I'm watching a movie with somebody I know, and it's actually an outdoor survival movie. And
Mm.
sort of watching it, and as we're watching it, I'm sort of looking at things and I'm going, oh well, you'd want to do this, you'd want to do that, because like, and I'm not an expert in outdoor survival by any means, but growing up in a more rural area, and having family who knew about things like this, I was just kind of naturally taught certain skill sets. And I understand that
Mm.
in some of the programs, you do some sort of like basic introduction to outdoors, things that might be very useful actually for somebody in going, say, hiking or doing things like that.
Sure. I think that this could come up in some other forest schools that are more remote more frequently, but we're out for a couple hours or sometimes the whole day with kids, but they still definitely are learning some of those skills. One of the highlight activities often for our participants is that we teach them how to light fires with flint and steel. It's very fun and satisfying, and it's tricky sometimes to start, and sometimes they're pretty young, but they keep going at it, and the pride that they have when they can succeed and just want to run and tell their parents or whoever's picking them up is always great to see. And they definitely are learning how to take care of themselves in outdoor environments. As I said, we're out in the rain, the cold, the snow, the wind, the hot sun, the bugs. And so there are a lot of conversations pretty much at the beginning of every session, like, how do you take care of yourself today? What's the weather? What's the environment? What's going on?
Mhm.
What do you need to do to take care of yourselves today? And kind of teaching that awareness and forethought. And one of the major components of that, if I may, this is kind of a segue, I suppose, into a different concept and into a different topic, but a major component of that, especially in Canada, is outdoor gear and proper
Mhm.
clothing and attire. And that can also be a major access issue, because a lot of times the right, most safe and comfortable gear is quite expensive.
Yeah.
So another thing we've very recently started that we're hoping can grow is that we have partnered with the Charlottetown Library, who hosts us for these different clothing swap and exchange events, so that families can come. Bring Kids grow so fast, clothes are so expensive, so they can bring what they no longer need, contribute it to this swap, and then come and take whatever it is that they need for what fits their kids and for the next season. You don't have to bring something in order to take something. So it's been awesome to be able to see the community come together for these events and how it can just support families. there's so much you have to think about and buy and take care of for kids. And if this can be a boost for our community access, we're happy that it's happening and that it can keep growing.
You point out that point that's really, and it's an interesting environmental justice thing, right? Like for those of us who were lucky enough to grow up, myself included, with not only being introduced to some of the skill sets around like being in the outdoors, but also like here's a rain jacket for this occasion, here's that. Like I imagine opportunities to do the sorts of things that you're doing, it is a high barrier for people to be able to afford the basic equipment and supplies for it.
For sure. And there's a saying that goes around. Connor, you can take this out if it's too much of a digression, but I'm gonna
Oh
say
no,
it
we
and
love
you can
digressions
decide
on this
later.
podcast. Go
Okay.
for it.
So, as I said, PEI Wild Child is founded on forest school principles, and the concept of the forest school is something that's growing and adapting in a range of directions all in Canada and North America, in a lot of places. And there is a statement that I believe originally is from Finland, which is there's no bad weather, only bad clothing. However, in a lot of the schools and a lot of the programming for kids, and even related to immigration in Finland, that clothing ends up being supplied for
Mm.
families. So, like, it's one thing to be able to say that, but it is a very glaringly large access issue when you want to be able to give as many kids as possible the opportunity to be outdoors and have those meaningful connections. When you're in a northern country like Canada, that is hard if you don't have the right stuff. So, the hopefully we can, as we go forward, continue to make more partnerships or find other ways to address that kind of access barrier so that it is just easier, safer, and more comfortable for more people to be able to be outside all year, continue making those connections with the land.
And it's a thing that, like, yeah, the more remote you go in Canada too, the options for that go down a lot. There's not as many support programs often, although there's exceptions to that. But and it's a problem in large cities as well. I mean, having the right sort
Mhm.
of clothing. I mean, again, it might be something if there's a lot of like hand-me-down clothes, for instance, right? That like are people will have if they grew up, going out into the weather a lot, right? They might have that, but if you're not from a family that again already kind of has that equipment and you can't afford it, like it's a challenge. I'm curious
Mhm.
to get into with all of this being discussed, what for you personally is like the most rewarding part about your work?
Oh, oh my goodness. Okay. I think the most rewarding part of this for me is when you see the kids lit up from their own passions while they're outside. Every with this forest school kind of approach, things are often pretty open-ended, and you're kind of watching for what the kids themselves are interested in, what they're bringing to this, and how you can support and facilitate and invite those kinds of activities and engagement for them. And so I think the most rewarding thing is I just feel like a film reel is going before my eyes of all these different memories coming up right now. For example, when the multiple times that kids have come up to me and told me that they made a song that was either about literally like them loving this part of the forest or about a specific animal or just their experience at Wild Child, and then they just sing me a song they made up. Or when somebody gets really determined to build a bridge or some elaborate structure and are just putting their problem solving and engineering skills to use. Or those moments where a kid is afraid to climb a tree and climbs maybe 2 feet off the ground, and then the next day they're 4 feet off the ground, and then the next and the where I'm talking them through listening to their body, how to stay safe and wise up there, but then they're so proud to be like, look, yesterday I only got to there and now I'm up on this branch instead. And like just how proud they can be as they're building their skills and confidence. Or honestly, even when they come up and are so excitedly telling me facts about some animal species I've never even heard of. It's just all these moments I think are my favorite thing is, I guess, just being able to behold or witness or support their curiosity, their discovery, their passion every day is just such an honor. Yeah, that's the most rewarding for sure.
That's awesome. So can you tell me a little bit about your nature immersion program?
Yes, this is one of my favorite things we do. And it's actually the way that PEI Wild Child kind of started. So nature immersion is a free program thanks to a few funders that we have, where we are able to visit public school classes, daycare centers, any type of kids group, and do a free program outside in a green space that's near them. So that might just be the school ground or an adjoining natural space beside their school or center. And so we're able to meet up with them and lead programming that is I in some way related to connecting to that natural land. So often it ends up being about learning about and getting excited about the different animals or plants that live in that ecosystem. It could be also connecting with, it could also be around nature connection and well-being. And so it's just a chance for kids who are in their school day to come out and have an opportunity to connect
Mm.
with a local piece of nature. And we really love this program and are hoping that it can just continue to expand, because only so many kids can, come to our other programs. But this gives us the chance to go and see as many kids as possible, bring them outside, and give them a chance for free just in the middle of their school day to start building those meaningful connections and hopefully create that spark for them as well.
Which I imagine is also easier for parents because they don't need to necessarily like travel to a location or something. Their kid is at the school and you're able to just go to them.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a really great program that is able to be happening. And it sounds like the school board as well is getting more and more interested in outdoor learning and nature based and like nature connection in the curriculum. And there's a few people trying to work on that. And so hopefully just more of this kind of idea can be spreading, and also teachers themselves can gain more confidence and see that even they could bring a part of what they're teaching outside or connect it to something that's actually right there in a local ecosystem, and that connects to what they are doing in the curriculum in the classroom, outside of the classroom.
I've got to ask, what's coming up in the near future for Wild Child PEI?
Sure. We are on the horizon. We have our very, very busy spring and summer seasons, and our summer just full of day camps. We also, our team grows for the coming season as more programs are run in the more pleasant, warmer weather. So
Right.
we're looking forward to all the new seasonal hires coming on, and all the upcoming programs. We are looking forward to continuing and deepening our relationship with the Mi'kmaq Family Resource Center. We're currently partnered for a few kids programs that are called Walk the Earth, where we work together to bring Indigenous off reserve kids in Prince Edward Island out onto the land, and they do some cultural learning and also just are part of that, just, getting to play and build connections with the local ecosystem. We have another round of young ecologists coming up this summer, as well as our Roots and Shoots camp that is for gender diverse kids and youth, and just being able to support their well being and confidence while also building that comfort and experience outdoors as well and with each other. And also, PEI Wild Child this summer will be hosting Forest and Nature School Practitioners course that is run through the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada. So in July, there will be a group of adults coming to have Wild Child and learning how to facilitate this kind of program on four school principals. And we're really stoked for that because it means more teachers, just more whoever's working with kids, whoever comes is going to be learning some of these perspectives and getting empowered with the skills to put this kind of work into practice. We just want to see more kids have more opportunities to be out there connecting with nature and just being outside. So we're really stoked for that as well.
That's awesome. How can people find out more?
We have a website, we have a Facebook page. You can just search PEI Wild Child, and I believe we are still the first thing that should come up. And I believe that we can put links in the show notes. Correct, Conor?
Totally. There'll be links below to some of the resources and website and everything.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much, Tamsyn, for joining me today.
Thank you. It was so wonderful to have this conversation with you.
Hi everyone, Conor Curtis here, jumping into the Q&A section for this episode. Just a quick reminder that these Q&A sections aren't on behalf of the people we interview, they're just on behalf of Sierra Club Canada. And we had a couple of questions in the wake of our carbon tax episode, and so that's kind of where I want to focus today. First of all, I want to go through a couple of the comments that we heard, because I think these are important things to talk about, right? Like, we had a couple of people write in and say, thank you for the information. I hadn't really known how this worked prior to the episode, and now I do. And I think that that's really cool. I'm glad you got something out of it. We had some people actually comment about basically dealing with some pretty severe health issues and being concerned about the direction we were going in climate policy and the risks that could pose to them. And so to those of you who are concerned about that aspect of this issue, I've got to say, yeah, there's reason to be concerned. I wish I could turn around and say that there isn't, but definitely this is why we need to be having these conversations and be having real conversations about that. And on that note, I want to address some questions we got back in the wake of that episode. So question number 1, why aren't we putting the emphasis on China to reduce their emissions? Why should Canada have to reduce ours? We got actually several different versions of this question, and I want to just talk about that while there are other countries that have larger emissions in total than Canada, Canada has much higher per capita emissions, right? Higher emissions per person. And why that's important is that if we're actually going to have a conversation about fairness in terms of dealing with climate change, well, then we need to talk about our emissions for the amount of people that we actually have in our country, not our amount of emissions in total. Because if we're talking about the amount of emissions in total, well, then we can end up with 1,000 people who have much lower emissions than 10 people shouldering more of the burden for dealing with those emissions, even though the 10 people per person have more emissions. And it's not to say that Canadians should have to shoulder the burden for these emissions. Again, part of the reason why carbon pricing works in the system that we have in Canada is because most Canadian families get more back from it. And that's part of the reason why that's successful. So I wanted to deal with that as question number 1. The second question that we got is, where are the facts and the sources on these issues? Where are the facts and the sources in the podcast? And for that, I have quite simply to say, there's a whole page we've dedicated to this. Do check it out. You can go to sierraclub.ca. It's there in one of our top pages. You can find info about the impact of the carbon tax. It's tagged in most of our social media accounts. There's a link in our bio. You can go check out that page, and it has tons of sources. 300 economists have come out, over 300 economists, I should say, have come out at this point saying that carbon taxation is a net positive for most families, that they get more back. And we had somebody actually ask in a follow-up, because we did chat about that in a follow-up that we did. And they said, well, who are these 300 economists? That's also linked in the thing. You can go check it out. So I encourage you to go do that. So that's another question that we got. Final question that we got was around, if most families get more back, then what's the purpose of the carbon tax? And again, we've gone several questions with this. So we're going to talk a little bit in abstract here, but it's going to answer these questions. The point is that you still are able to save more if you act in a environmentally sustainable manner. So think about it this way, like 2 scenarios. You do the unenvironmentally friendly thing, you pay the carbon tax. you're part of the most families to get more back from the carbon tax, so you get more back in the rebate. Okay, well, you've net done better than if there's no carbon tax. Great. Now let's take the alternate scenario. You do the environmentally friendly thing. You reduce your emissions. Well, you still get the rebate back, so you're still getting the same from that. But now you've also saved money off of having to expend money into the carbon pricing system in the first place. So in both cases, you've done better off than you would have without the carbon tax. It's just that in the case where you do the environmentally sustainable thing, where you cut your emissions, you do even better than the case where you don't. And this ties into, again, the whole point of this thing. If we want to put a price on pollution, I think the only fair way to do that would be to give the money back to people who are in most need of it in order to make those green choices. And that's exactly kind of what the carbon pricing system that we have does. There's a lot of discussion that could definitely be had around how do we roll that out? Are we doing that in the best way? You know, are there other ways that we could be doing this that could be there? But at the end of the day, if you want to talk about the pluses and minuses of carbon pricing, that's a different conversation than saying we just shouldn't have it at all, even when it is benefiting, again, most Canadian families. So it's another question that I wanted to get to. I'm hoping these are informative for people. We are having events. We have a new webinar series. We're going to be dealing with things like misinformation and how to deal with it and how to address questions like this. As I say, to see people get back to us with actually their concerns for their health and their family's health if we fail to cut emissions, that's been a disturbing thing to see, because it is a reminder that, again, we often talk about the impacts of climate policy in terms of longer term impacts, right? Reducing emissions, reducing climate change, but we need to talk as much about the health impacts of reducing emissions right away and how that benefits people who are most at risk in our communities, in our cities, in our towns, all over the place. You know, all of us know somebody who's at risk of ambient air pollution. All of us know somebody who's in that situation. And those people should not be left out, should not be excluded from this debate, should not be treated as a secondary concern. Again, the only people who really benefit from us scrapping carbon pricing are oil and gas companies. And the reason why they particularly benefit from this is that this entire debate is drawing attention away from the fact that their profits are actually what's really driving things like inflation in this country. That their excess profits that have come off of the backs of Canadians are really the major problem. Oil and gas lobbyists love the fact that we're having discussions to draw attention away from how they make their money. And that's the biggest problem that we have. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about all this climate misinformation, where it's really coming from, it's coming from the oil and gas industry. It's a pretty clear line, and it's a pretty basic principle. The person who has the most money to make from something is probably going to argue to keep making their money, if profit is their only motive that they've been given. And these oil and gas companies have no other motive than to make a ton of profit. So I hope this has been informative. It's been a chance to address a few of these things. We have tons of fact sheets, as I say, check them out. A reminder also that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. ET. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe so you get the latest episodes from us.